Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome. Welcome to this third keynote session. My name is David Lantigua. I'm an associate professor of theology here at the University of Notre Dame and also the co-director of the Cushwa Center for the Study of American Catholicism. It's my distinct pleasure to introduce our two speakers for this afternoon's keynote session on ideology and Christian nationalism, both of whom are colleagues and friends over the years, I've known at least since graduate school. Both of them bring expertise on the topic of social ethics and political theology, especially from the Latin American and US context to think through these categories. Our first speaker joining us from Rome is Emilce Cuda, who is Secretary of the Pontifical Commission for Latin America at the Vatican, Holy See. She's the first woman appointed a leadership position in this role. She's also ordinary member of the Pontifical Academy of Social Sciences and the Pontifical Academy Pro Vita. She's also an advisor to the Conference of Catholic Bishops in Latin America, or CELAM. She's also has a professorship at Loyola University of Chicago. She's received 2 honorary doctorates, one from Loyola University of Chicago and another one from the National University of Rosario in Argentina. She's also taught at Boston College, Northwestern University in DePaul. She received a Ph.D. in theology from the Pontifical Catholic University of Argentina and specializes in social and moral theology. Emilce is an internationally renowned speaker who brings her theological wisdom to consider Pope Francis's social magisterium. She is the author of Para Leer Francisco, which has been translated into Italian. And has it been translated into English too? Not yet. Okay. To Read Francis as the title. And I can just think of no better person who can speak about the pulse of the current papacy from an Argentine and global context than Emilce. Our second speaker is Janna Hunter-Bowman, who is Associate Professor of Peace Studies and Christian Social Ethics and Director of Peace Studies at Anabaptist Mennonite Biblical Seminary here in Elkhart, Indiana. She's been very involved with the organization of this conference. Her first book, Witnessing Peace, Becoming Agents Under Duress in Colombia, is rooted in 10 years of peace building and research that she spent in Latin America. Her community-engaged scholarship currently focuses on immigrant organizing here in the United States. She's a recipient of Louisville Institute's sabbatical grant for researchers, which supports this current book project she's working on that's entitled, Would You Join Us? Latin American Migrant-Led Social Movements and Remembering the Crucified Body. Sure to be a fantastic book. Essays also appear in the Journal of the Society of Christian Ethics, Political Theology, Journal of Peace Building and Development, and the Mennonite Quarterly Review. She received her Ph.D. here from the Kroc Institute for International Peace Studies and the Theology Department at Notre Dame. Both Emilce and Janna are truly invigorating conversation partners who bring on-the-ground experience to guide us today. Please join me in welcoming them.
Good afternoon, everybody. I am from Argentina, so my language is Spanish. Sorry about my awful pronunciation, but I will do my best. Thank you so much, David, for this presentation, and thank you for the university for inviting me. Really, it's important this moment because I work with those people for a lot of years. We are a team trying to connect the experience, religious experience, theological experience between both continents, Latin America and North America. That is my challenge, building bridges that Pope Francis asked to me. I work with him, and I would like to show you how Pope Francis think and act in relationship with ideology. December 12 is in the Catholic calendar is the date of the Virgen de Guadalupe, the Mother of God. Guadalupe is one of the advocation in the Catholicism. And 12th December at the Vatican, we have a Mass, Latin Mass. And for the last 3 years, you can check this on internet, Pope Francis, at the moment of his homily, he didn't use his 15 minutes to teach. He only said, careful, no ideologizar a la madre. And he repeats 3 times the same, no ideologizar a la madre. Don't ideologize to the mother. And then silence. To be strong. So this is a good point because Pope Francis, for 12 years in his pontificate, a lot of time he was against ideology. And it's important to distinguish the difference between ideology and theology. Which is the difference? Theology is the logos about theos. It is the discourse about God. But ideology is the discourse about the idea. For us believers, God is not an idea. God exists. So, if we believers confuse God with an idea, that is wrong. Maybe for others who are not believers, okay, this is the same, but not for us. The idea to critique ideology comes outside the Catholicism. In the 19th century, we can find famous authors, not canonically allowed to name, who write against ideology, right? But in our case, it's important to separate this because the idea is that some people have an idea. This idea is in connection with their particular and personal interest. They build a logos, a discourse about this interest. This interest becomes an idea, and they show us that idea like an universal principles, and then they ask from us a cult, a religion, and this is idolatry. This is ideology. Theology, on the contrary, for us, for believers, is a discourse about what God tells us about what we are and where we must go. This is the sign of the time. Sign of the time, this is the name of this encounter, is exactly that. The sign of the time is how to know what God asks from us, what God asks, wants from us, but where we can listen God through the history, through the people, a través de los pueblos. That is sabiduría, and that is sensus fidei, according with Second Vatican Council. It is each of us, in our own conscience, we can listen what God asks to us, but where we listen that? Between the people, in a community. That is a history. But some people think that God appear, or the Mother of God appear and tell them where or to where the history must go, the politics must be, the economy must do. For that reason, from the Vatican last year, from the Dicastery, the Dicasterio de la Doctrina de la Fe, we have a new document about all these things, about if the Mother of God speak or not speak, if she appear or not appear, to say be careful with all that history. It's not like that. So, I try to show that at the moment, for believers, the ideology is going through our religious symbol. They take our religious symbol. For example, the Mother of God, for example, the Rosary, for example, the social doctrine of the Church. And this is sad because people believe in that symbols, believe in the Mother of God, believe in pray the Rosary, and try to go ahead with the social doctrine of the Church. So, if any of us appear and told you, okay, God or Virgin or send to me to vote this person or that person, this candidate or that candidate, maybe you go, because I have your faith. Yo tengo la fe de ustedes. The attention of the people is the most important thing at the moment in the capitalisms. This is a system that look for goods, economical goods, but for that need the market. We must don't confuse capitalisms with market. It's different things. The capitalisms need attention to involve all of us in the market. Attention is the most important thing, the most expensive thing. The big companies put a lot of money in publicity, in the media. In any media? No. Only in the media that can take your attention. The church is a media because can offer the attention of millions and millions of persons. So if I put money in a Catholic or any religious influencer, if I put money in this new network influencers, religious in internet, they can repeat not theology but ideology. This is the situation at the moment. You can check this in the network. That's the reason why Pope Francis said, careful, no ideologizar a la Virgen. One example of that is 2 years ago in Mexico, there was a big meeting of libertarians. Libertarianism is the new mode of liberalism, no? Libertarianism, so different, maybe so different. This meeting with libertarianism was under the image of Guadalupe. And then they give rosaries to the people who was there. This is good or bad? It's religious, it's a rosary, are sacred symbols. That's okay. The problem is for what they use that. That is abuse in the faith. I'm sorry, I can't. Justo the most important word I can't say exactly one. Is the enemy. Okay. We have different examples. For example, in Argentina, we have a priest who pray with the rosary of balas. ¿Cómo se dice balas? Balls? Bullets. And he is the most important influencer, not in Argentina, in Latin America, Spain, and United States. Because the new frontier in the geopolitical, at this geopolitical moment, the new frontier is the language. If you speak Spanish and you have the attention of the Spanish speaker, you can control political campaign in all Latin America, in United States, in Europe, and everywhere where somebody speaking in Spanish can to understand you. Of course, the church put him away from his diocese, but if some bishop say, okay, you can't say that in his diocese, okay, he stopped. But if in his diocese nobody silence him, the bishop of the other diocese can't stop him because it's through the media. So at this moment, we are, in my opinion, in a new mode of politics. Pope Francis said in the middle of the pandemic that after the pandemic, nothing will be the same. And we can see now a new system in activity. But it's interesting that in this new system that is starting, and as in all change in the middle, we have a chaotic time. In this chaotic time, like in others chaotic time in the history, who occupy the place of the politics is the religion. So we were in a secular political space, but at the moment we are in a post-secular political space. For that moment, religion occupies the place of the politics. But religion not as theology, but as ideology. What we can do with this? Well, I am not a prophet. I am an academic. I only can to show what we can see from Latin America, special. I am not sure what happened here exactly in the United States. It's not my country. But for example, from the universities, we are organized and we work together. We have a network through different universities in Latin America in connection with some universities in the United States to take together the problem. Because the problem is not more a national problem. It's a geopolitical problem. So, speak about the Christians or Catholicism's nationalists. I think that was the topic in the past, in the 20th century. For example, in Latin America, the Dirty War had a strong fundamental principles from the Catholicism, that nationalist Catholicism. But we had the liberation theology too, of course, both. But at the moment, we are not sure that candidate that showed themselves fundamentalist, Catholic, Christian, really believe in God. Most of them are not exactly believers, but they use the faith of the people to push their ideology through our sacred symbols. It's important after 200 of liberalisms in the academy to start to speak about the difference between religions and theology, because religions is functional to the end of the state, is functional to the politics, is a ritual. But theology is the reason trying to give good arguments about faith. It's different. Through theology, like public war, we can see along the history for 2,000 years, universities, astronomy, philosophy, geography, architecture, art, music, all that before the modernity was part of our believers, universities, scientific, political. Is something not bad, but the result is because was not cult, was not religions. What was academic thinker, investigation, hard science. But in this moment, all the religions are being reduced to culto, to the cult only. And for 200 years, the liberalisms, especially in Latin America, the public university, the most strong universities in our countries, to separate religion and state, most of our scientific and academic can't to distinguish the difference between religion and theology. And it's important at the moment to understand this difference. Because if not, if we don't know what exactly or how exactly go ahead the ideology through the religion, we will be in political problems. So this is my apport to you, and I am ready to have a discussions or questions. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Emilce. Emilce and I usually speak about political theology in Latin America. So I'm going to speak from an Anabaptist perspective on these questions, which is different than what Emilce and I usually discuss. So, Michael Sattler, a monk turned Anabaptist movement leader, was executed in 1527 after declaring his exclusive allegiance to Jesus Christ before representatives of the Holy Roman Empire. It was a time of deep anxiety about Christian Europe amid Muslim-Christian hostility. Sattler's advocacy of non-resistance toward the Muslim Turks of the Ottoman Empire, that is, his refusal to kill them, was taken as aiding and abetting the greatest enemy of Christendom. At his trial, he said, "If the Turk comes, he should not be resisted, for it stands written, 'Thou shalt not kill,' Matthew 5:21. We should not defend ourselves against the Turks or our other persecutors, but with reverent prayer should implore God that he might be our defense and our resistance. But if warring were right, I would rather take the field against so-called Christians who persecute, capture, and kill pious Christians than against the Turks." Sattler was condemned to death by Catholic authorities as an arch-heretic accordingly. The authorities misstated his non-resistant pacifism to condemn him before the eyes of Europe. Catholic authorities were not the only ones at this time exercising spiritual and political coercion to enforce an us-them dualism in support of quaking empire. Lutheran principalities did likewise. Anabaptists believed that Luther's reforms should have resulted in a believers' church that was a minority in the population. Such a minority church would produce a pluralistic society in which moral minorities were tolerated. Instead, Luther opted for what would become the state church model that set Luther and Anabaptists against each other. The Lutheran Augsburg Confession of 1530, condemning Anabaptists, provided a political theological justification for Lutheran states to crush Anabaptist groups within their borders, which they did effectively. What led Sattler and other radicals to this pacifist nonconformity while Europe was in existential anguish? What drew the fury of Christian authorities? The answer is as simple as it is profound: allegiance to Jesus Christ. The proposition of allegiance to Jesus Christ has major implications for how the Anabaptist tradition interprets Scripture in community and thinks about ecclesiology as community and about discipleship. Placing Christ at the center informs biblical interpretation, such as the scriptural command, "Thou shalt not kill," is read through the Sermon on the Mount as a divine authoritative injunction to pursue peacemaking, or what we today would call peace building, contextually. Discipleship means that Christ's life becomes our example. This allegiance to Jesus Christ sometimes comes into conflict with rival claims to our loyalty and allegiance, such as instantiations of Christian imperial religion. Those who set themselves up as rivals are practicing idolatry, putting something relative in the place of God. In Hebrew and Christian scriptures, idolatry is betrayal or disloyalty in God-human relationships. This offense against God is, in some instances, a cosmic offense. It undoes the world. The assumption that it's the job of a group of Christians or a church to manage society is outrageous because it is idolatrous. Imperial religion pairs this ideology and coercion with collective identity and territorialism, the principle cuyo regio, cuyo religio, whose realm, his religion, requiring inhabitants of a territory to conform to the religion of their Catholic or Lutheran ruler or emigrate. This principle, elaborated in the 1555 Peace of Augsburg, contributed to political centralization and provides the root for the 1614 Peace of Westphalia, which established a new system of sovereign nation-states. According to the historian Michael Dreiger, neither the Peace of Augsburg nor the Peace of Westphalia granted special rights to Anabaptists. They had not conformed to any given territory's approved faith and became what he describes as moral minorities in a world of Christian hegemony. This is because on a community level, Anabaptists understood themselves to be under the rule of Christ. Placing the believing community under Christ's rule severs the church community from the Holy Roman Empire, Lutheran and Calvinist principalities or sovereigns, state-building elites, and ecclesial hierarchies. Rejection of idolatry of worldly magistrates, to draw on Sattler's language, does not mean rejecting the magistrate's claim to power. Sattler is widely recognized as the primary author of the Schleitheim Confession, of which Article 6 reads that the sword is ordained to be used by the worldly magistrates. In this formulation, rejecting idolatry does not mean denying the magistrate's legitimacy, but it does not share the magistrate's epistemology or way of seeing. The confession speaks to a distinction that has been instantiated historically through the centuries, shaped by the modern state system. We can distinguish between rejecting the ideology, assumptions, and epistemology of the state on one hand, and accepting the state's claim to power on the other. According to this distinction, it's possible to accept the state's claim to power, but to do so on terms different from those the state articulates. We can apprehend the state as a site of multiple and permanently contested meanings that tries to ground society without ever being able to do so. This allows moral minorities within a state to interact with the state in various ways without creating an idol of the state or denying the state's legitimacy. It breaks the state's claims to ultimacy, but does not overdetermine moral minorities' relationship with the state in the process, as occurs when the state is conceptualized as little more than an idol. Consider William Cavanaugh's view of the state. In The Myth of Religious Violence, Kavanaugh provides an account of the rise of the secular nation state. His analysis helpfully counters the narrative that secularity provides an answer to so-called religious violence. But Kavanaugh overstates the case when he describes the secular nation state principally through the paradigm of idolatry. Kavanaugh does not treat the state as anything apart from the ideological claims that must be rejected. So he leaves open the question of the state's relative legitimacy. By implying that the liberal state does not use smoke and mirrors to legitimize itself ideologically, but is reducible to smoke and mirrors created by unacceptable ideological claims, he leaves us with a state that is reduced to a dangerous theological problem. From distinct vantage points, Michael Sattler could, and Enrique Dussel did, in a conversation where I was with Emilce, echo pragmatist religious studies scholar Jeffrey Stout's question, is there nothing in the political life of modern democracies or in the lives of those who are struggling for just and decent arrangements within them that a loving God would bless? Today, I'm concerned that Christians thinking with Kavanaugh have few conceptual resources to problematize the rise of a white Christian ethnostate. If the state is reducible to the ideological claims, a presidential task force to eradicate anti-Christian bias and immediately halt anti-Christian sentiment might not sound like a bad idea. The problem, rather, is the ideology of the state. This is an occasion in which it's useful to distinguish the ideology of the state from the state's claim to power, as above, so that we have grounds on which to protest the brazen dismantling of federal agencies, corrupt money in politics, and the executive branch overrunning the other branches of government. A second point in relation to the task force, Sattler's condemnation as arch-heretic for advocating a minority Christian position brings into relief the problem of weaponizing one form of Christianity, Christendom, against other forms of Christianity and other religious expressions. In Anabaptist perspective, at least in the one I'm offering to you, a state ought not be Christian. On the bright side, the task force to eradicate anti-Christian bias makes it impossible to ignore the problem. This naked expression of Christian hegemony in existential crisis poses the questions. Will those who pledge allegiance to Jesus conform to the spiritual and political coercion of authorities who are organizing systems to persecute, capture, dehumanize, demonize, and let die, if not execute, those deemed other? The dismantling of USAID, leading to some deaths with more to come, invocation of the Alien Enemies Act to deport Venezuelans, and the detention and revocation of the green card of Mahmoud Khalil for protesting in support of Palestinian lives are a few examples. Will Christians, to borrow from Jonathan Tran, continue in a faith emptied of everything but the luxuries of privilege? Will we persist with myths and accommodations, then continue self-righteously dumbstruck in the face of the eventualities, like the fulfillment of election promises? Or will we practice an ungovernable Christian faith, to borrow Mennonite pastor Melissa Flor Bixler's turn of phrase? In Anabaptism, refusing to swear oaths took away in the 16th century and takes away today a key tool for control used by the state. Practicing this ungovernable faith further means gathering as community. We gather, we discern, we pray, we listen, and we do this over and over as the Holy Spirit forms our common life as a body of Christ. Sattler is a model in part. I want his conformity to spiritual and political coercion and his clear and courageous opposition to the ideological claims of imperial religion to inspire us. For Christians, this means refusing in Jesus' name to be governed by the logic linking religion, political power, and territory. Refusing, as Christendom in its death throes channels its ferocious desperation to venerate the great leader, legitimate the demonizing and scapegoating of racial, ethnic, gender, and religious others, and promote beliefs in the inherent superiority of members of the majority group. Christiform opposition to ideological claims means witness that allows us to imagine beyond what is today, surely part of what we need to think our way out of the present, as the social theorist Naomi Klein puts it. It means not erasing moral minorities from the narrative, but supporting the existence of moral minorities to contribute to collective political imaginations. For example, intertwined conviction and contingency of early Anabaptists support contemporary political theorist William Connolly's notion of a profound pluralism in which multiple ways of life negotiate and cooperate with one another because each party understands itself as a minority amidst minorities, even Christians among other Christians. Yet I say in part because Sattler's political theology is not all we need. It does not grapple with the reality of violence within our Anabaptist tradition, our citizenship in settler states, enmeshment in systems that produce death, or the privilege many of us enjoy. It does not necessarily turn our faces from our own communities to those most deeply affected by violence or to struggles for life. Fortunately, this is not all we get from the tradition of Mennonite peace theology from which I'm speaking. Peace theology is not one thing, but plural. The various approaches are not fully formed, they are not self-standing, they're not mutually exclusive attitudes that emerge, but they emerge as corrective and contribution to a tradition and the Christian theological thought more generally. There have been, I would argue, 4 ways of peace theology: non-resistance, transformation, reckoning, and responsibility. Each wave offers a posture that coheres with the ideology-legitimacy distinction, insofar as it recognizes the dangers of the state without delegitimizing it. Wave 1, from 1940s to the 1950s, emphasizes non-resistance, non-participation, and separation. The second wave of transformation, from the 1980s through the turn of the century and continuing today, does not identify with non-resistance as avoiding an active role in protest and seeking political and material change. The second wave accepts civil nonviolent resistance or nonviolent actions deployed to seek social change. The third wave reckons with the agonizing disconnect between Mennonites' stated affirmation and lived reality, between concepts of peace and the violence they shield, and in which Mennonites have participated in all of the horrors of Christian church history. This includes setting up mini Mennonite Christendoms on land colonized in the Americas and cleared by war. It includes a long history of Mennonite anti-Semitism, including involvement in the Holocaust through symbolic and direct violence. It includes the sexual violence of renowned peace theologian John Howard Yoder, and I could go on. Reckoning dismantled Anabaptist exceptionalism, by which I mean the belief that real Anabaptism was somehow immune from the worst aspects of Christian history and also had an exclusive possession on the best aspects. The Reckoning wave rethought Anabaptism as a minor tradition that has what Catholics would call the particular charism of lifting up for Christians of all communions possibilities for creative nonviolence, for exploring new horizons liberated from the status quo and powers that try to rule the world through violence. The grassroots organization Mennonite Action synthesizes second wave realism of the state with third wave realism about North American church members' citizenship in society. Mennonite Action is, in its own words, a movement of Mennonites taking public action for a free Palestine and the liberation of all God's children. It's an expression of the fourth wave because it takes Reinhold Niebuhr's call to become wise as servants and innocent as doves to a new level by deliberately and strategically building power, primarily through a self-critical retelling of Mennonite's story. Mennonite Action shows that the Mennonite tradition has resources for movement building and an attractive call to reject imperial religion today. Refusing the public-private distinction, a steering committee member states, our protest is worship. And here's an example in the Capitol. Representatives speak of enacting a new reality in a community bearing witness to Jesus, of the call to discipleship issued by an executed God condemned on the charge of subversion, who defines creative nonviolence, creative responses to violence born from God's refusal to conform to violence. They deliberately distance themselves from positions of non-resistance as separation and refusal to engage, while claiming nonconformity to political and spiritual coercion, like their early spiritual ancestor, Michael Sattler. By doing theology in public, they mobilize Mennonite symbols associated with ideal colonial whiteness, such as 4-part Christian hymns and handmade quilts for decolonial ends, my colleague Jamie Pitts observed. The features I have just named are an exercise of responsibility that includes distance-taking, ambivalence, disavow, and reaffirmation of elements of a tradition. It's an exercise in self-conscious formation that still has a long way to go. It is conceptually coherent with the ideology-legitimacy distinction, such that pacifists who've been politically homeless in liberal politics now dig deep into themselves and their tradition as what Atalia Omer calls critical caretakers of a tradition, to form political bodies and movement that are on firm ground to struggle against Christian political coercion and against the dismantling of the state. I offer this as a concrete example of Christians' engagement that is self-critically Christian. By being ungovernable in the face of coercion and struggling for justice, it commits to looking for redemption even if doing so is costly, even if the results are not visible, and even when justice is not achieved. It is an example of Christians and fellow travelers trying, woefully imperfectly. There's still a long way to go in terms of telling the story in an adequately self-critical mode, but trying to behave as Christians against unjust systems, not out of concern for the church's salvation, but because they are reckoning with their own enmeshment in those systems and have chosen to turn towards the many who suffer the devastation of those systems. Along the way, the moral minority movement finds new friends and walks alongside new partners headed in the same direction. For example, Mennonite Action has actively sought coalition with Jewish Voices for Peace that likewise resists ethno-religious states. Thinkers of post-foundational populism, focusing on what makes the idea of a people possible, help me to articulate what is at stake in a way that I hope helps my comments to connect with what Emilce and I often talk about. Formation of people as moral minorities through mobilization have the capacity to contest signifiers that are important for our democratic coexistence, community, Christian people, religious freedoms, and keep them from being absorbed into nationalist, racist, xenophobic, misogynistic instrumentalizations. They have potential to disturb hegemonic Christian efforts that deny difference, exclude the foreigner, and wish to assume responsibility for the moral structure of a pluralistic society. What is at stake is the formation of people as moral minorities who can come alongside others to organize in what political theorists Chantal Mouffe and Ernesto Laclau call collective articulation, a fundamental process in politics in which different elements are brought together into relationship with one another, creating a new whole that is more than the sum of its parts. As Christian ethicists, we examine our current situation as if God mattered. We survey the options available to us by looking back and around at the affordances of traditions embodied by people who make them available through historical instantiation and articulation. And we speak of witness to something beyond ourselves to imagine what else might be possible beyond what we see right now. I began with Michael Sattler before the Holy Roman Empire because his witness incites our imagination to see the possibilities that open by refusing to participate in violence and refusing the common sense. To see the power of small movements of dissidents refusing imperial nationalistic framing of in-group, out-group opposition that does not absorb others and that is not absorbed by others. Perhaps it helps us to think about the possibilities of creating new alliances and agonisms to confront authoritarianisms. For Christians of all communions today are challenged to render allegiance to Jesus Christ meaningful. I hope it liberates us for creative nonviolence, for exploring new horizons, and from the status quo and authoritarian powers that try to rule the world through terror, violence, and idolatry. My way into this is through tracing the historical existence of moral minorities that help us to trace an ideology legitimation distinction historically instantiated in an ungovernable faith in struggle to contribute to what Pope Francis has declared a year of jubilee through unity in difference to organize hope as the ultimate goal of politics.
Thank you, Janna and Emilce. So if you want to take maybe 15, 20 seconds here to gather your thoughts, there's the QR code here to consider presenting questions. The speakers don't mind, I'll take the liberty to ask a question here based on previous conversations and things that came up. This is specifically for Emilce, though, Janna, feel free to enter in, especially with your current research. And it's about the question of ideology, ideología, which, as you know, Emilce, is very important to the Latin American church, the Catholic Church. The bishops at Puebla in 1979 kind of laid out three different ideologías that were very destructive at the time, with attention to the ideology of the national security state, the ideology of liberal capitalism, and the ideology of Marxist collectivism. And when you look at a figure like Oscar Romero, you see him working with those categories as a way of analyzing the Salvadoran reality that he faced. My question for you is, since you talk about the new era that we're living in, especially after the pandemic, is there a specific kind of ideology that, un diferente ideología today, that you might want to draw attention to or think that maybe the Pope is trying to give attention to?
Well, I think ideology is ideology always. No? It's not different. I think we continue in the same work, but in a different state. Yesterday we were speaking during the dinner about Carl Schmitt, and Carl Schmitt has a little text. The name is Mar y Tierra, no? Earth and Ocean. And in that paper, he said that when we are in the middle of a big technological change, everything changed. And this is the moment. The technology is in another moment, is a qualitative difference, not quantitative, qualitative difference. And he said, At the first moment, the state was in the earth, and the war was between infanteria, armas people, no, on the earth. Then, when the technology moved to the ocean, the biggest state was that state that can to build a new technology through the ocean and move the state from one to the other. Then, when the technology grow up to the cielo, no? Sky. Other state was in the power. And there he finished. But now, at the history, the technology moved the territory from the earth, the ocean, or the sky to the virtuality. So we must to understand that we are in a new territory, and the state moved to. When the state moved from one to the other, all the political forms change, because the old political forms, like, for example, republic and democracy, are not enough for the new system. So the first question, before to try to understand the ideology, is the question where the state is. For 200 years, the state was in the administration, because we are in a system of law. So, for example, religious people go to do advocacy for rights. But now, the state is relocated, not, in my opinion, in one administration, in the government. The state is relocated in persons, in individuals. There is the state. Why? Because the state is a place where they take the decision, the life or the death for the people. So we are in a new state, not in a state of law. In my opinion, we're in the state of, not in the state of law, in a new feudalisms. And through that new feudalisms, who is the owner of the life and of the death? Always the state put money in the academy, in the religion. Alejandro Magno invite that when he decided to put money in the academics of that moment to stop them to do revolution. Always the state put the money. But where now the new state, the new feudalisms, some author call it techno-feudalisms. Where is the money, where they are going to put the money? They are putting the money in the academy, in this country. If I am not wrong, was close the Minister of Education, no? Something like that. In my country too. So, where is going to put the money? In the universities, like Alejandro Magno did in the past, or in religion, in the virtuality? So, the idea is not which is the religion, the ideology now, but from where comes the money, and which is the state who has the power to reconducir, no? To drive the ideology.
This is for Janna. Thank you. Did you want to add anything, by the way?
That's fine.
Okay. So what advice, this is more of a practical question and pastoral perhaps, so what advice would you give to Christians who want to help their Christian communities become more comfortable with being in the moral minority?
These questions are always contextual. So I guess it would depend where the person is starting from. But I think what I've noticed is that growing accustomed with the idea of not being in charge is a really uncomfortable idea. And even thinking through what it would mean to not be in charge. This is why I say I don't know where this person is coming from, right? But if a lot of people in this room, a lot of us are white. Not everyone. A lot of us are white. So coming to a place where we would figure out what it means to come together and organize and build power, not to be in charge, but build power in order to come alongside the struggle of those who are most deeply affected by the policies right now it's kind of a particular frame, and that might be a starting place, is to think about how do we come to terms with, and how do we think about being followers of Jesus in a way that doesn't even seek to be in charge, but does seek to create coalitions. That might be one place to start.
So this question, I'm going to take it and put it in a bit of an angle here for you, Emilce, about the relationship between religion and violence. Y la violencia y la religión. So the questioner mentions how in the U.S. There have been white supremacists lately chanting Cristo Rey, Christ is King. And this person remembers Viva Cristo Rey being chanted, and the stories of the Mexican Cristeros being told in the parishes, as you know, during the 20th century in Mexico's history, and then those stories being told again today, or in the last 15 years. So the question is, how do we think about that relationship between religion and violence? I mean, especially when you think about that particular conflict with the secular liberal policies of Mexico in the 1917 Constitution. They were doing great damage to the church, persecution, of course, that the church would have been familiar with in the French Revolution as well. And the papacy, here Pope Pius XI, was writing letters in support of the persecuted church, even to the point of thinking of taking up arms and taking up weapons, or las armas, right, or revolución. And so knowing your history in Argentina, this would be another way to think about this, like with the if you think of the history of Movimiento de Sacerdotes del Tercer Mundo, the Third World movement of priests that thought about this question of revolution. How do we navigate that tension, and as particularly a way of guiding us today with the desire to bring together religion and violence?
Well, as you can see, he knows very well Latin America and these topics. Thank you for that question. Es La Guerra Cristera. Well, some people now, in the actuality, are looking for the Christianity, the Cristiandad. That is horrible. As you know, after that, the church publicly said that no more Catholic parties. No more Catholic parties. But some people in the actuality are pushing and putting a lot of money for Catholic parties again. One thing is if a priest or bishops or cardinal participate himself in politics, involve religion with politics. That is not allowed for the Catholicism. Other things is lay people as citizens, they must do politics. They must participate in politics. That is perfect. But when those Catholic people as citizens participate in politics, they participate in a secular mode, no from the Catholic principle. This is absolutely different. The sad history, for example, in Europe was that all that people who push for a Catholic party was cooptados for the fascisms. And that all of us know how that position finished. So in the actuality, some people suddenly they want to install again the Christiandad, and but it's few people, not too much people in my opinion. We need a sociologist that do the numbers, but they have a big visibility in media. And it's important how the media change, because always the power use the mediation of the mass media. El barroco is a big example. All the art in the world, for example, was the media for communication, ideas. Then in the modernity or the 20th century, TV, radio, schools, union workers was media. Religion was in a second place. But now the technology changed the media too. The people has not in the same place. The people are not going to the school in the peripheries no more. They can go to the universities. They can go to work because the unemployed is structural. So, which is the media? Well, now the media is mobile like the people. The people is nomade. In the past, you can see the same noticiero, the same news program in TV every day at 8 or 6 in the afternoon with the family around the table. But now, if you are moving all the time from one country to the other, one city to the other, through where this ideology go? This is the new media that move with you. And so the money is not, of course, the power don't put the money in universities or in union workers, or they put the money in the media. So this is important because if you go there and if you take your time, listen, these new influencers, they, for example, in the field of the Catholicism, they are asking for the Mass in Latin again. They mix religion with politics. They try to move the people to vote for one candidate or other from Catholic principles and not from rights. The political campaign in the 20th century was around rights, civil rights for one, and social rights for others. No? But at the moment, the politics is not around rights, because there isn't a state that can to respond to that. The state moved. So now the campaign is around life. It's interesting. This is a big change. We are not speaking about rights, but about life in all the sense. In this moment, if we are fighting for life, not for to eat or no, for life, for survive, because that is the demand in the peripheries, survive, in that moment, of course, the theological hope is there, and they are taking that. So Hannah finished speaking about how organized the hope, really. And this is my personal vision.
Yeah, go for it. Emilce, I have your microphone, so I'll ask you a question. I'm curious where you see communities organizing hope. I understand how yesterday we were talking about how Trump organizes hope, but I wonder where you see particular counterpoints in your work as you're looking across the Americas, where you see communities and movements organizing hope in ways that provide an antidote or a counterforce to that, or what you would like to see?
Well, 1 hour ago, we listened a good presentation about Latin America or Latin people living here in the United States. Cosecha is an organizer community. And we have different communities organized by Catholic people or Christian in general. To understand that, the difference, because all them are doing community to survive. That is clear. But the difference is who is organizing that community. Because if that people are in necessity, if you have money, you can go with your money and will be the organizer of that community. So the final question, and that comes from the Curas para el Tercer Mundo, is not what is the people, but where is the people? Because the power go and put the money where the people is. The question is not a metaphysical question. If the people is in our organized community, they go there. So the people who are there, like leaders, Pope Francis said that the real leaders come from down to up. The community is a constitution, not our institution. So the idea is how strong are the leaders that can organize that community to prevent the ideology that arrives from the money and organize that community politically. This is the question. How strong are them to do a big frontier to prevent that political advance through religious symbol?
All right, this is another question from the audience for Janna, and it kind of follows on the first one that was asked to you, or it's related in a sense. There can be a fine line between being comfortable not being in power and fetishizing being a witness to suffering, which is a critique of feminist theology very often. How do you achieve the former while avoiding the latter?
It seems like the fetishization can also come alongside or be associated with the romanticization also. And here I'm going to speak directly from experience and conversations that I've had with Dara Marquez and Carlos Castaneda, who are sitting here with us today. And I think that, and I should say, they're partners in the work that we're doing together in thinking with immigrant-led social movements on these questions that Emilce was just speaking about. And something that we've talked about together, because they have placed it front and center, is to say, we as communities, as impacted communities, are complex people, and don't romanticize, because this would also, ends up dehumanizing also, is to make any group of people to fetishize, is to romanticize, is to make people less than complex, and to then this becomes really impossible to think together if we're not understanding that both of us, that all of us in this dialogue are complex human beings that are in our full humanity. So I think this becomes this recognition of complexity and this recognition of full humanity in a dialogue becomes maybe an antidote to this kind of an over-romanticization or a fetishization of witness, where one would stand or sit or walk alongside and simply bear witness, as if you're not in complex human relationships all the time. That becomes that is a point I think that is methodologically important and epistemologically important as we're thinking about the possibilities of doing theology together and thinking about, for us, is struggling together and thinking about theorizing together. Is that need to understand that relationship as that possibility for thinking together.
Perhaps I could add to that another question related, just given some of the research I've done with some immigrant-led movements as well, and looking at, as an antidote maybe to this as well, this romanticization, would be to actually take stock of and take pride in successes that are gained by these communities and these movements. And I'm just wondering, with your experience with Cosecha, like, because I know in working with the Coalition of Immokalee Workers, their successes are very important to thinking about the agency that they possess as a community and as a people, rather than just kind of focusing on the renunciation of political power in the conventional sense that we often use it at the national political level or in electoral politics. But they still have power, they still have agency. And so maybe you could just say a bit more about your experience, like what have been some of those successes, or we could just ask.
Sure. I feel like I should just ask Carlos and Dada to come up here. But I will say, so some of you were at the session in the morning, and so I'll highlight 2 points there. And the first would be that Carlos showed the video of one of the successes of Movimiento Cosecha, and one of the campaigns is around driver's license. And so part of what that video was about was to demonstrate the phases and the work that went into the possibility of achieving driver's license for people without legal documentation. And so this shows the process of coming to that. And Carlos stated, and I'm just going to echo what Carlos said this morning, was that for years and years, there was a coalition that was working to achieve driver's license in New Jersey. And then it was when Cosecha arrived, is a kind of eruption, to use kind of language that is sometimes used in thinking about these collective actions, that the more interruptive component was what pushed it over the edge in terms of achieving driver's license. And I also want to highlight, as a part of that, what Carlos discussed this morning was an emphasis on the building and creating popular power. So it's very much along the lines of not working to claim advocacy or a kind of intervention in the state on a scale of speaking the state's language, but rather through building and creating popular power, which is to say the power that is almost by definition excluded by the state, right? Through the creation and the cultivation of community that holds difference. As we heard this morning, as Carlos was talking about, people not just who are Pentecostal and are Catholic, but are atheist and Jewish and are of other persuasions or other religions or none at all. So that possibility for building and creating popular power, and through building a community that has a kind of political intervention that is not advocacy in a state system as such.
So this question, following again, Janna, has to do with given the Anabaptist historical and theological opposition to the fusion of church and state, how does one explain the seduction of Mennonites in the U.S. By Christian nationalism?
There was there was an article in a publication called Anabaptist World after the most recent elections, and by 2 gentlemen by the name of Miller and Miller. And they, it's true, there's their names. And they they wanted to explain to their brethren and sisters, I presume, but they said brethren, why it was that they voted for Trump and why they were celebrating Trump's victory. And they provided a number of reasons. And one of them was that they said, although we recognize that Anabaptists have historically rejected Christendom and positions of Christendom, we believe it's time to embrace Christendom. So why? Because I'm speaking, as a Mennonite here, we're also very attracted to be in charge, and we would like to also wield power. What else do we say? I mean, so this is, and this is why I tried to articulate this fourth wave of reckoning, which is very clear about that Anabaptists don't have a special gene that makes Anabaptists particularly peaceful or particularly resistant to this strain, this virus of desire for power. But why then this work of formation continues to be so important for all of us, right? Why this work of gathering, coming together, of praying and thinking together, and being formed by these processes is an ongoing need, because for us, this is one of the reasons that you see in the political realm.
This question's really for both of you. Can you say a bit about, or give a kind of prediction regarding maybe the future of either Catholicism or Christianity, either in the U.S. or perhaps specifically in Argentina, with the strong tendency, and here the question is really geared towards the U.S., but with the strong tendency towards Christian nationalism? Like, what do you kind of see on the horizon?
Well, I would like put this in relationship with the other part of your question about violence. At the moment, by Pope Francis, maybe as all of you know, he speaks about the new mode of war, una guerra a pedazos. This is a war in a step. So, to understand that short sentence, this is the mode that he used to speak the short sentence, lacónico, is first we must understand which are the modes that the violence appear now. Because if we think in a war only in the sense of Ukraine-Russia, well, maybe we have two wars at the moment. But if the war is a situation where the people die for injustice, we have a lot of war open at the moment. At the moment, in the war, we have between conqueror war and revolution, so civil war, we have at the moment 62 war open in the war. But if you added all the others mode of violence, we have a lot of war at the moment. So, which is the prediction, which is the solution? Well, Pope Francis said, o nos unimos o nos hundimos. Or we arrive to the unity or we go down. So, the union is the solution. The union, no in the sense of the fascisms. Everything, everybody thinking the same, addressing the same. No. It's the unity in the difference. And this is not something impossible to get, because he said at the same time that everything is connected. Everything is connected. It's connected by the connectivity. It's connected because we are part of the same human family. But everything is connected. And what is happening now in Argentina is the same that is happening now in the United States, and is the same that it will be happening in some European countries. Sometimes in the last election, because last year was an important year for elections, a lot of countries did his election for the new presidents. And some countries looking, for example, what happened in Argentina, they can to prevent and change the tendency of the elections. This is important. And this is because everything is connected. So I think it's important to be informed what happened in other countries, which was the consequence of certain mode of politics in other countries, to understand how will be the future. This is not to be prophet. This is to be informed. This is important.
My brief answer to that question, I think, is deeply informed by living in Colombia, South America, for some years, where violence happens, right? It's and I think living in the U.S. and not having lived through overt violence and persecution can make it a little bit hard to imagine. But one of the reasons that I started and I narrated as I did was to remind myself and our communities that we've lived through situations of violence before, and we will again. And we have resources to draw on, to make, to discern together, and to decide how we're going to live, because I think it's going to become more difficult. I think that we have options, and I think this is one of the reasons that we wanted to have this conference also was to be able to remember those resources that we have within our traditions in order to become who we believe we need to be.
Relatedly to that, there's a question about the mobilization of support among the Mennonite community for the victims in Gaza. And so I'm just wondering if you could say more about that, like in comparison to other Christian communities, like what is it about the Mennonite community? I think it's been alluded to in many ways and even spoken about, but just maybe if you could say a bit more about perhaps the more practical dimensions of that organizing, or why there seems to be a greater alliance there, those kinds of communities.
Sure. Mennonite Central Committee is a relief and development and peace-building organization of the Mennonite Church. And over the years, Mennonite Central Committee has had a presence in the Middle East in different places, and a number of people who now live in the United States have worked with Mennonite Central Committee in Israel Palestine over the years, and so have deep relationships with communities and with individuals there, and that certainly shapes. That is one factor. A second factor, and here I don't know if Lisa Shirk is here, but some years ago the Mennonite Church created a resolution on Israel Palestine, and it took what was called a two-handed approach, and outlined a desire to both have one hand reaching out to Palestinians in seeking peace in Israel Palestine, and the other hand was reaching out to the Jewish community, and speaking to the need and the imperative to both redress historical anti-Semitism within the Mennonite tradition, and to understand the deep trauma and wounds and the need for ongoing work for understanding that in Israel, and also to seek peace in Palestine. And so that kind of church statement also is precedent setting and contributes to this kind of work. And then a third dimension, again, on a very practical level, is that there were a number of individuals who are some of the founders of Mennonite Action who were working as professional organizers for years. So one of them was one of the organizers of the Occupy movement. Another was working with a member of Congress, and a third was working with Bernie Sanders' ground campaign. And so had deep experience in organizing. And so when October 7th happened, and as they were trying to think through how do we respond, they were highly dissatisfied with how Mennonites and Christians were responding. They left their various posts and converged and started Mennonite Action out of a belief that this is something that needed to happen, rooted in their own faith traditions.
This is for Emilce. Maybe this will be our last question. And it's about the term ideology and kind of getting a clear definition. Because as the questioner put it, the colloquial and former usage seems to present ideology as somebody else's deficient understanding of reality and plan for the future. That was the definition provided. And Catholic social teaching tends to use the term in this way. Would you be able to provide a bit more in terms of helping this questioner to kind of clarify the meaning of ideología? Sí, como que es la mejor manera de definir el concepto de ideología.
Well, there is a famous philosopher, no Catholic, who is Zizek. And Zizek has a movie about ideology. Maybe some of you know the movie, no? And it's interesting because he presents the ideology like glasses. Like glasses that the system put to you to see the reality in other color, other things, no? And he invites to take off these glasses and to see the reality without mediation. This is interesting. It's a metaphor, but it's simple to understand that the mediation, the mass media, no, is exactly that. It's a mediation between us and the reality. And that is in Platón, no? La alegoría de la caverna. Platón is a mediation. This is the people, the slaves are in a car, and they are seated and atados, no, encadenados, watching figures in the wall. And nobody have the idea to turn and to see if in other part there is other thing. But if one of them look back and see a light and go there, this slave can see that the reality is not that projection that is a mediation, no? Platon said, it's few probable that one person look to the other way, no? But if one go outside and see the incarnation, the reality, is probably this person never won't go back to the cavern. But if this person go back to the cavern and try to explain to the other that ideology is ideology and not reality, probably all that people kill him. And that happened in the campos de concentración in Germany, where the activists told to the people in the line going to the gas camera that they was going to die. Those people in the line kill to the messenger. So it's not easy to go outside of the ideology because we have these glasses as Marshall McLuhan told us, no? It's the media, it's the communication. Thank you. Sorry.
No, thank you. Please join me again in thanking our speakers.